One of those things when you're that young where everybody's kind of bad at it. And I just think I was a little better bad than a lot of the other kids. I have to lift at this time or it doesn't get done. I have to train at this time or it doesn't get done. I think 3 months in to the doctorate program, I was ready to give up on track. I just had to put in less effort. I mean, I felt like my cognition and ability for memory recollection was just so much higher. And I just started making teams. If you think that the best athletes in the world are living eco-friendly and not eating meat, you're crazy. If you're taking care of your body, if you're sleeping well, if your recovery's high, if you're eating food that has nutrient density in it, right? You're not just treating your body like trash. I mean, there's absolutely no reason why your performance won't continue to rise. I mean, dude, I can shut everything off and go out and just sprint my ass off and die out there.
Welcome, Dr. CJ Allen. Thanks for being willing to do this. For those who don't know, I mean, you just got back recently from the Paris Olympics where you're competing as an athlete. You're an American record holder in, I guess, the 400-meter indoor hurdles, and you're also a chiropractic physician. And you've also been doing a carnivore diet, or at least that's my understanding. So that's pretty cool stuff. So I guess let me just start with the athletic background because I think that's really cool. 400-meter in general just sucks, and 400-meter hurdle makes it even worse, I assume. I mean, my daughter's running track, and she hates the 400. She's good at the 400, but she hates it because it's not fun. Tell me how you got into that stuff, first of all.
Yeah, so I've been running the 4 for about 19 years now. My dad was a decathlete back in high school, and I played baseball, football, soccer, basketball. Track was always on the table, especially because it felt like it ran in the family. So I started hurdling, started running in 5th grade. Yeah, it's one of those things when you're that young where everybody's kind of bad at it. And I just think I was a little better bad than a lot of the other kids. And so you just keep rolling with it, keep rolling with the punches. And by the time I got to high school, I was very underdeveloped compared to a lot of kids. I struggled early on. I was 5'6", 100 pounds, soaking wet, freshman year of high school. And by my junior year, I had hit my growth spurt and I had started running fast. And college was all of a sudden on the table, and I was getting hit up by a bunch of people. And my high school coach, I mean, he to this day is, I told you freshman year you were going to be something. Good guy, but yeah, ran in college and then just always had a fire under my ass.
Were you always like a 400-meter specialist? Because, I mean, there's a lot of them, like 200, 800, there's kind of obviously that middle distances. The 400, 800, most people hate because it's very painful, as you probably aware.
Yeah.
It's a sprint. Like they make fun of the 100-meter sprinters because they'll do like their workout will be, we're going to run 450s and 100 today and we're done. And then the other guys are running all these repeats and stuff like that. But how did you evolve to where you specialized in the 400-meter hurdle? Because I imagine you probably ran a variety of events like high school and maybe even college. I don't know.
Yeah, high school. So there's no 400 hurdles in high school. There's a 300 hurdle, at least in the state of Washington. The East Coast has a couple schools that have adopted the 400 hurdles early. I was better in the 300 hurdles. I did run the open 400. I ran 4x1, 4x4, 200s. I mean, in high school, when you're a workhorse too, and you're racing for points, you typically run just about everything in that wheelhouse. And so I started getting recruited for the 300 hurdles out of high school to come run the 400 hurdles. You are absolutely right. It is by far the worst event on the track. I've done everything from 5K cross country down to the 100-meter sprint, and training, recovery, the race itself. I mean, everything is it's painful and it's hard. It's very hard. It's probably one of the harder things I've had to do in life. But, fortunately, as a career, right, it makes everything a whole hell of a lot easier to do because you kind of get used to that pain, that suffering a little bit. And so, yeah, I think I just excelled enough in the 300 hurdles in high school where that kind of became my wheelhouse, and the transition was a lot more seamless to that event than others.
How many, because I don't know, I mean, how many hurdles are on a 400-meter track? How many obstacles do you have to run over?
We have 10.
So 10 hurdles. So every 40 meters, basically, you're hitting a hurdle or something like that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's 45 to 1, 35 to the rest, and then 40 coming home.
Okay. And I mean, how tall are you now? Because you said you were relatively shorter in high school. How tall did you end up being?
I'm 6'2".
6 foot. So that helps. I mean, I think height is somewhat of an advantage in hurdles. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. It would seem like it might be, right?
It can be. Surprisingly, I'm on the taller end. I mean, we have a guy on the circuit right now he's phenomenal. He's 6'7", and then we have some guys that are under 6 foot running faster, right? So it is an interesting spectrum of sizes, at least for the 400 and for the 400 hurdles. I will say that having a longer stride length is a little bit more important. You have some of these shorter guys, their hips are up to their chest or my chest, right? And they're 3 or 4 inches shorter than me. It is a very rhythmic event where you're running a stride pattern through every hurdle, right? And so I would say that is of more benefit than height in general.
Let me ask, because you're a doctor of chiropractic. I assume you work and practice, I'm guessing, but I mean, that's training for the Olympics. It's got to be a time commitment. What was the work-life balance with that?
Yeah, that's kind of why I'm excited to actually even be able to talk to you about all this stuff, because a lot of it is possible, I think, because of diet and lifestyle changes that I had made going even through school. I mean, school was incredibly difficult. We're in class from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. some days. I mean, you know how hard some of the didactic is. You went through a medical program or a doctorate program, and unless you're regimented and completely disciplined in every aspect of your life, it's not possible. And so I think going through school helped that transition, because I'm only a year and a couple months graduated. This whole 4-year cycle, right? Because all the Olympics goes on 4-year cycles. So we do training blocks. We have these large scale macro cycles set up for a 4-year cycle. And so I was in school for the 2020 trials, 2021 Olympics because of COVID. And this last Olympic cycle, my first Olympic team, was the first time that I was also out of school. But people go, what did you do in the year leading up to that? I've been doing this for 19 years, right? And it's the 19-year accumulation that gets us to this point. It's not just what I did over the last year. And I think being in school and getting used to handling that workload of going, hey, I have to lift at this time or it doesn't get done. I have to train at this time or it doesn't get done. I have to eat this meal right at this period, because this is the only period that I have. Like I said before, some days you're in class from 7 to 7 with 0 breaks. So a normal person looks at that and they go, you have no time to work out. Well, I beg to differ.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember like when I was doing my surgical residency in particular, we just worked, I mean, it was ridiculous, 100, 120, sometimes 130 hours a week. And I would go in at 4 o'clock in the morning in the gym to train just because that's when I could do it. And you sacrifice on the other end, sleep and all these other things. But I mean, obviously, it's different because you're trained for the Olympics. This is like peak performance of athleticism. It's not just, hey, I want to stay in shape. It's got to be really challenging and very regimented to do that. What are your times? Because you got the indoor record for the 400 indoor. What's the time on that?
So the indoor it's a unique event. It doesn't get run all the time just because I think it poses a little bit of a risk and danger, because you're running on a 200-meter bank track. So there's elevation. So you're running down into hurdles, you're running up into hurdles. You can essentially only run 3 or 4 people because it's a 6-lane track. But the hurdles, you're breaking in, everybody's hurdling in lane 1 at a certain point. There is some sort of risk involved. So I think it's avoided quite a bit. I ran 48.80, I believe, and I was 1/10 of a second off the world best, so the world record in that. And then for the outdoor 400 hurdles, which is the more recognized event, my PR is 47.58.
Wow. And then what about a flat out 400 with no obstacles? Do you ever focus on that anymore? Or?
I don't run it a ton. I've run some 45 flats, high 44 splits in the relay. I think my best open was 46 flat. I had run that indoor a couple years ago. Again, I mean, we focus on speed a lot in training, and we'll do 400 specific work in training. But typically, because it is so much of a demand and at this level of competition, it's not like we're in high school again, right? Where you're running that 4x1, the 2, the 300 hurdles, and you can come back and run the open 4 and the 4x4. I mean, one race will take you out for a lot of the rest of the day. And so it's not as feasible.
Yeah, I imagine there's like a minimum 100-meter time. You got to probably hit something like 11 seconds, I would imagine, somewhere in that neighborhood to be able to run that 46. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but you got to be able to hit a certain speed, or there's no way you can't just speed endurance it the whole way, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'll have to be under 11 unless, you have God-given endurance, which you just typically don't see. I mean, the typical spread for a 400 is 2 second differential between the 200. So your first 200 is typically going to be 2 seconds faster. I mean, what are we at? We're at 20, 22 and 24. And I mean, just speaking outright, that typically doesn't happen. And you're not going to run 11:0, 11:0, right? You might run 10:8 and 10:6 going down the backstretch, and then you're going to be a little bit slower coming home. A lot of the guys that are competing at this level, I mean, they're 10:0 guys. I've seen some 400 guys run 9:8, 9:9,
Wow.
and then go out. And I mean, there's a lot of foot speed involved, especially nowadays.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, like I'm thinking of another a guy I interviewed. He's a decathlete, and he's doing carnivore, and he's 10:2 as a decathlete, which again, it's not a specialized sport, but I mean, that's still hauling ass. I mean, I've got some sort of aspirations as I turn 60 for some things I want to hit. So I got to drop some weight, obviously, to get there. But I'd just like to go sub 60, 400 to match my daughter, because my daughter, I can't have my daughter kicking my ass. So
for sure. No, I will say I think it's totally badass what you're doing. I mean, you just don't see that often. I see you post the plyometrics. I see you do the sprints, and I mean, age regardless, you just don't see that often unless you're in my world.
Yeah, and I think that's something we should see more often. That's something I hope more people recognize how important it is to maintain that kind of bounciness. I mean, I think that's an important aspect, because we lose that. That is the hardest thing. It's not hard to be strong. It's not hard to be relatively decent endurance wise, but to be able to jump and sprint and do that stuff is really hard. And it's tough when you're 260 pounds, I can tell you.
Yeah.
But, hey, man, so talk about your diet, because obviously that's unique among athletes, because we always hear, oh, you got to pound a bunch of carbs to be good. What are your thoughts on diet now that you've sort of experimented?
Yeah, I would say I'm still experimenting. I think that's something that I continue to play with as far as performance parameters. I want to give a little background into how I kind of transitioned into this, because I think it is important. And I think that there's a lot of, I won't even say stereotypes, but misconceptions about diet. And I think that you're one of the people that probably understands that the most right now, as far as just what we've come to know, or that the science has told us, versus what reality is and what's really going on. And when I had moved from Washington, as we had discussed, I ran track at Washington State University. And so I was over there for 5 years. I did 2 years after college, and moved to Atlanta in 2019 to start my doctorate program. I think 3 months into the doctorate program, I was ready to give up on track. And I say that because I was so brain fog. I mean, I was brain fog going into class. I was tired and sluggish trying to get around the track. These are extra stuff and training that I had done my entire career with minimal effort, right? And I'm struggling all of a sudden. And then you have class after. And so it's just, by the end of the day, I'm beat tired. And it's like, at that point, right, something has to give. And so I'm like, look, I pack it in, focus on school, focus on my career, that's a really hard pill, especially for someone like me to swallow, because I'm a competitor, and I've been a competitor my entire life. And or you find something else and you find another way about it. And dude, I'm in school learning about all the holistic ways to maximize performance. And you're learning about the human body and physiology and training. And I train by myself. I'll do all my own strength and conditioning. My college coach will send me workouts, but sometimes there's modifications that have to be made. And so I have to have an understanding of everything that's going on in my training, right? Because it's just me at the end of the day. I have to force myself to be out there, and I need to stay up on my studies. And I was hesitant to limit carbs, just because all anaerobic performance is glucose heavy. It relies on carbohydrates and a heavy carb load, and you're not going to get the same power output if you're on a high fat, high protein diet. And so I was going through some research articles and stuff, and I had seen a study. I think it was 12 people, right? It's one of those studies that a lot of people would probably write off, but it was looking at power output on a typical high carbohydrate diet versus a high protein, high fat diet. And they had the same group, and they were able to match the power output, which for me, right, all I needed was a sign. I just needed something to tell me that, hey, power out could be matched on high fat, high protein. And I'm looking too, I'm having a hard time even processing information in the classroom, because I'm so tired and my brain just feels foggy. So I started reading about seed oils. I checked into some of the bulletproof stuff. I got into the bulletproof coffee, where I was blending 2-3 tablespoons of butter every morning just to get a higher fat intake in. And I was doing intermittent fasting, and I started slamming ribeyes and sirloins. And it's funny because it's food, right? People look at me like I'm crazy, but you guys are eating all this ultra processed stuff and struggling, and I'm trying to make a change as I'm the crazy one, right? And so, I'm telling you right now, it changed the entire outlook of my career. I went from a 49.4 400 hurdler, barely making it through rounds. I qualified for USA's, but I was top 15, top 20. You got to be top 3 to make a team. I was struggling in the classroom. I'd see test scores and exam scores of B's and C's, and then it was like within 4 or 5 months, my performance on the track was through the roof. It wasn't that I just had to put in less effort. I felt like my cognition and ability for memory recollection was just so much higher. And I just started making teams. I made a team in 2022, 23, and 24. I've gone 3 years in a row. And I'm coming from somebody who's barely making it into trials and USA's to be in top 3. And now I think on time, I'm top 30 in world history.
Wow. That's pretty freaking incredible, man. That's awesome.
It's crazy.
So this is interesting because I do the stuff on the rowing machine, which is not 500-meter row is not too dissimilar to a 400-meter run. It takes about 1:15. So you're kind of in that same anaerobic zone, and it's miserable for the last 20 seconds. It's pretty sucky. And I'm sure the last 100 meters of a 400-meter is you're just grinding to get through. But I don't feel like I have to train as hard as I used to get the same results. It just seems like I can do it a little more easily, like you're saying. I echo that. And I don't know, like I said, I know if you go up to the US Olympic training facility, maybe, I don't know where it is for track, maybe up in Colorado Springs or wherever it might be, but they like measure like lactate levels, and there's all kinds of stuff their performance things are measuring. And it'd be interesting to see. I don't know if you making the US Olympic team, does that afford you those facilities, or are you still kind of on your own? I'm not sure how much. I know some sports have more money than others, I think.
Yeah, we do pretty well. We have the greatest track and field team in the world, so they take good care of us. We have a tier system, so if you're a medalist or you're ranked in the top 15 in the world, you essentially have access to all that. I can get my blood work done. I can get all my differentials, and we have our MDs who will typically read that stuff out and stuff. They just kind of send it to me. Like, you can take a look at it for yourself. But even Colorado Springs and stuff like that, we can do all of our rehab through there. If there's injuries, they'll fly us over there, and I can reach out and see if they would do testing as far as blood lactic levels or just anaerobic performance on different diets or whatever.
Yeah, no, I had like a little lactate meter that I would do. I'd go row, and then you draw your lactate and see if it was like whatever, 15 something. And sometimes it was pretty high. And I don't know how predictive that is. I know in the rowing world, there was at least a period of time where they were excited about what that meant relative to performance. And I'm not sure how well it actually does hold up, but you see this going from 49 to 46 or what 47. You said 45, 47 is a huge performance. At that level, that's huge. When you get to that world-class level, taking 2 seconds off, remarkable. It's almost probably the same thing that like a drug would get, because there's people that get popped for PEDs, and the difference is going to be in that range, that 10% range or something like that in a lot of cases. You said you kind of do your own thing. You design your own workouts other than maybe some input from a coach. But do you have anybody does USA Track and Field say, hey, this is a nutrition strategy, this is how you do it? Or is it just whatever the results are, they are? Is there any kind of guidance you get about that?
We have them. I think that they do a great job. I think that a lot of the time there are just a lot of uneducated athletes who are, right. It's like you take a step in one direction and you're going to have a positive outcome. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the best outcome or it's the best strategy. And so they do a really good job of information and providing athletes with information and supporting us. For me, I just feel like I have a different understanding of nutrition. I feel like that there's a different approach that I take, that they're still going to tell me that I need to consume carbohydrates. I had an ankle fracture in 2015, overtraining, just a stress fracture on my navicular. If I have carbohydrates, that thing will blow up on me, and I struggle to train. And so for me, right, it's why would I do that if, one, high fat, high protein has brought me the career that it's brought me over the last 3-4 years. And two, it's if all this inflammation's kicking back up in my body and it's going, hey, we need to put the brakes on a little bit, I'm not necessarily going to listen to that advice, which I think it's still great for a lot of the athletes. It's just for me, it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's something that I'm an old guy. No one cares what I do. It's all for personal stuff. But I mean, at my point, I'm like, I could eat carbs and I might see a slight improvement in any given workout with power output. But the net effect would be, I feel like garbage for 2 or 3 days and I don't want to train and it's painful. And again, over time, as you train over a 4-year cycle, you got to be able to put in workout after workout over weeks and days and months and years. And if you can't do that because of chronic inflammation or pain, your performance is going to suffer. And I think this is what a lot of people get lost in. They look at they kind of lose a forest for the trees. They're looking, we got this study that shows a 4% increase in power output if I carb load. And all of a sudden it's like over time. And I think this is a perfect example of what you're seeing here. Okay. So you're at the Paris Olympics and famously or infamously, they're trying to be
eco-friendly,
eco-friendly, and they're serving plant-based gar. How did you deal that with the Olympics? And you're like, great, there's a veggie burger. I don't know what they're serving, but how did that work out?
It worked out that way for about 3 days. And there was so many complaints that they flew in, I think just over 1,500 pounds of eggs and a couple thousand pounds of meat. I mean, it was every athlete in there, it was an outcry. I mean, it was almost like a shame on you type thing. I mean, if you think that the best athletes in the world are living eco-friendly and not eating meat, you're crazy. And to put that with, I mean, you have a village of some of the greatest athletes in the history of the world at any given time coming through that village, and it's not a time for personal beliefs or whatever you want to call it, right? That come into this. Fortunately for the U.S. team, we had a high performance center, and they flew all our own chefs in, so we had steak and chicken and whatever we needed as far as protein, because they kind of understand, okay, the nutrition demands are going to be a little different in every country you're in, but we're going to make sure that you're eating food that you're used to and food that you absolutely need for performance.
Yeah, thankfully. Yeah, we saw that similar with the World Cup in soccer. Argentina flew in 8,000 pounds of beef, and then they won the World Cup because they're like, look, we're not. Yeah. And it was also in France, I think, and they were just like, what are they doing here? These kind of knuckleheads. But you're on the Olympic team. So how old are you right now? Because you're like mid-20s, I'm guessing. I don't know how old you are.
29.
29. So
yeah.
Do you have another Olympics in you, or what are the thoughts at this point?
Yeah, I mean, the name of the game is recovery. So I'm technically past my prime according to track years, but I mean, I just think that comes because people are ripping too hot and they break down and you run into injuries. So I think statistically over time, 29 is old, 30 is old, 31, 32, I'll be 33 come the next cycle. But dude, if you're taking care of your body, if you're sleeping well, if your recovery's high, if you're eating food that has nutrient density in it, right? You're not just treating your body like trash. I mean, there's absolutely no reason why your performance won't continue to rise. Yeah, if my sponsors want to rock for another 4 years, if the funding's there, the support's there, if my times are there, I mean, you have to go year by year too, right? I mean, every year is different in times and performances fluctuate and things change. I mean, you fall to that top 3 and don't make a team, and all of a sudden you lose a huge source of income and people stop rocking with you. And it is kind of a brutal world to, live in. And I do have another profession. I'm trying to get my private practice open, and I want to be able to help other people out as well. And so there's a lot of factors. Is the fire in me? Yeah. 4 years, LA. Yeah. If everything goes according to plan, I'll be there.
Good for you. Yeah, I mean, correct me if I don't know how Michael Johnson was, because he had a pretty long career, didn't he? Because he hurdled and stuff as well, didn't he?
Mike was a flat 400 guy.
Oh, never mind. Okay,
but he did have a long career. He did have a long career.
There was a guy maybe it was Edwin Moses.
Edwin Moses. There you go.
That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah, and he had quite a long career as a hurdler, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, there was a stint there. He went undefeated for 7 years, something. I mean, that's just unheard of.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So let's walk us through like a typical training cycle for you. What do you do? I mean, how much weightlifting, running, sprinting, how do you dial that in for what you're doing?
Yeah, so typically my Mondays are going to be power. Doing a lot of Olympics, back squat, tons of plyometrics. I program a ton of plyometrics. I mean, that's That's the best way to increase
I,
foot speed.
I just got to tell you, I mean, hopping is so damn hard, man. That is something that, I mean, I know it's, like I said, I was working with a guy named Matt Watson, and he was just kind of showing me, he said, hopping, and it is hard. I mean, for people who don't do it, particularly when you're an old guy. Anyway, go ahead.
It's hard to come from years of degeneration and stagnation of not utilizing, right, the fascia lines and the plyometric power to jump and move. I mean, when was the last time that a majority of people beyond, I'll even say 25?
I think I saw data that after 30, only about 5% of the people ever sprint again.
Wow.
At least in this country, which is just, I mean, it's incredibly sad to think that. I mean, you're coming from a world where sprinting is every day, or basically, or more or less. And so you go from that to never sprinting again the rest of your life. You see how much deconditioning and deterioration would occur in that. And so it's interesting that hopefully can change. But anyway, so you've got lifting on Monday, a bunch of plyos, and then where do you go?
Yep. So that's my morning. You can see I have my gym behind me. It's just everything I need here at the house. So I'll lift here and then I head to the track. Typically that's around 9 or 10 in the morning. And I'm doing short speed sprints.
So you'll lift first and do squatting and then sprint after that? Is that what you're doing?
Yes,
okay, interesting.
Yes, so
yeah. Okay.
I didn't used to do that. It was something that I was forced to doing with school because I would really only have that 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. block to lift because I had class at 7 a.m. And then I would be able to go to the track between my lunch break on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. My Wednesday was typically that 7 to 7. And so then I'd be able to train for 2 hours between that 11 to 1 block and then just scarf down food after or in class or wherever I could, which was typically a ribeye or a sirloin from the night before. So I'll do that. Typically Tuesdays is my speed endurance days. So those are more of the lactic days, lactic threshold days. I'm doing.
So what would that be, like a 300 meter or something like that? Or where would that be?
It would be more like a 300 meter over hurdles with a short jog. And then I'm ripping through 100 hurdles again. So broken 500s over hurdles, typically short rate rest, 4 or 5 minutes in between. And then I'm doing that for 3 or 4 reps in total. Otherwise, it'll be, fast 300s. My coach, he loves 300s, 250s, stuff that's just, I mean, increasing kind of that acidosis in the skeletal tissue and, pushing fitness.
Yeah, I think because, and I'm certainly not a track expert, but I've been kind of learning enough that speed endurance is not running a bunch of 400s to get endurance. It's maintaining top speed for longer periods of time, really pushing that top speed over repetitively. Is that a fair way to assess that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the body's still going to perform within its physiological function and physiological creation, right? So if your foot speed is a 12 seconds in the 100, you're not going to run 12 seconds every 100 all the way around the track because you're not going to build a red line for 400 meters. I mean, you won't build a red line for I think that they say that after drive phase, 40, 50 meters, I mean, acceleration stops and it's maintenance. You're holding on to speed is what the theory is. And ultimately, if your foot speed is 10.0, you have the ability to run faster on the back end. So that burnout, as it's guaranteed to happen, is going to be faster than the guy who's, only able to run 12 seconds.
Yeah, I thought when I was doing rowing, and I know I was training for a 500 meter world record for my age, I was doing a lot of just as fast as I could at the shorter speeds, just because I knew I had to develop that. I had to be able to row a certain speed very rapidly, and then I would just add to the distance to that. But I mean, that was something you have to develop that ability to have that power, first of all, particularly for the distance you're at. Now, if you're running ultra marathons, and it becomes obviously less important, but
everybody still does some form of interval training. Like, were you doing interval training when you were rowing? Like 100-meter row sprints and stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, I realized that those intervals, the rest period becomes really important. Where it's instead of like you see these Tabata workouts where shit, you're gonna the second by the time you get to the third rep, it's a waste of time. So you're going to need 100-meter row, which takes me about 15 seconds. I might have to recover for 2 to 3 minutes between that. And I don't know talk about the rest periods, because I think that's something a lot of people maybe, I guess when it comes to performance, if you're just trying to get tired, do Tabatas and don't rest very long, and you'll be tired, but your performance may not improve.
Yeah, I mean, it does depend on like speed output too, right? So I can go run 50s or 60s with a minute rest, where I'm ripping hard. And obviously by the end of 5, I'm pretty tired. And then I'll take an extended rest of 8-10 minutes in between sets. I'm doing sets of 5. But if I'm out running 300s and I'm ripping 300s, I mean, I will probably be down and out for 10-15 minutes if I'm going full speed, right? Because it's just, I mean, you start to reach lactic threshold on rep 1 because you're forcing those parameters. So there's different workouts and there's specifics to each thing, right? So if you're doing a 100-meter row at 100%, of course you're going to be tired, right? And you're going to have to take a couple minutes off. But if you're doing a 100-meter row at 80%, right, or 75%, you can start training intervals, right, where you're training submaximal performances with shorter rest times to increase overall speed, endurance, and fitness.
Yeah. Again, but I mean, I think that you got to hit that high intensity. You got to hit
that's
that
Friday. That's Friday.
Yeah, that's Friday on you. How do you not get injured? Because that's I mean, one of the things. Because I would, when I was 40, I would race 20-year-olds. I'd go out and run and sprint. I try to kick their ass and I pull my hamstring or something like that. So now I'm doing more I just started doing Nordic curls, which is, they're freaking hard to do, particularly when you're big. But my understanding is those things protect you from hamstring injuries. And there's probably a lot of things. So how do you keep from getting hurt? Because that's the name of the game, staying healthy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've kind of developed 2 different schools of thought on that. I can speak on the Nordic part first. It's typically very slow, very controlled, isolated strengthening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where when you're sprinting, it's good to have strength, but it's very dynamic. It's very fast. It's utilizing different muscle fibers than you would use if you're doing a slow, controlled Nordic hamstring, right? So if you rehab and you're, because typically you could do some eccentrics, right, on the Nordics, and you're strengthening through rehabilitation or prehab, right? So you avoid injury. If you're doing that, you're typically training what? Type 1 muscle fibers, right? Like slow twitch, like just volume, right? And so it's like when you go out to sprint, are your fast twitch muscle fibers also being rehabbed? And I bounce around with this idea all the time, right? And so it's, if I'm looking to maximize performance and mitigating injury, I'm typically doing things that in isolation, as far as like plyometrics and stuff like that, where I'm able to overload my body, but in a safer environment, right? So I'm not sprinting maximally because I'm potentially putting myself at risk, right? I wouldn't start my season out by ripping 300-meter reps for day 1, right? I'm going to progress into that. I'm going to allow my body to start to adapt to the training cycle. I think that there is a time, right, for Nordics and hamstring extensions and stuff for your knees and low back in isolation. But I think that there also has to be some sort of prehab built in, right? So I do a lot of dribbling. I do a lot of movement patterns that mimic what I'm going to do when I'm running, but in a way that I'm doing them under greater loads than I would just running, right? Plyometrics, what they say is 9 times body weight you can load, whereas running is 4 to 5. So it's like if you can train above, you're mitigating risk because you're overtraining those muscles to handle something greater than what you're able to produce, right? That's optimally where speed ends up coming from because you're training above, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that it's something that a lot of people compare like jumping to running. There's a lot of, because when you're running, the difference between like a race walker versus a runner, there's a float phase where both feet are off the ground. So it's kind of like it's like a series of jumps in many ways. Is that a fair way to look at that?
I mean, a race walker is not producing the same ground reaction forces as a sprinter would. So I wouldn't say go train race walk for the sprints, right?
No, not at all. Yeah, it's because they always have, by definition, they have to have one foot on the ground at all time. Otherwise, they get disqualified. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, as a sprinter, right, you spend more time in the air than you do on the ground. That's ultimately where speed comes from, right? Is minimizing those ground reaction times and maximizing ground reaction forces.
Do you ever measure that? I mean, there's devices where you can measure your contact time. There's like reactive strength index where you can look at jumping, hopping, and how long you're on the ground. And I know it's like, probably for running, it's like less than 100 milliseconds. I mean, is that something you ever look into?
I've done it before. We've done the vertical mats. We've done standing vert to just measure central nervous system activation before a training session. I've used the bands, Whoop. I've used the Oura Ring to measure. I'm trying to think. There was a heart rate monitor that we had used for a little while to just measure like overall recovery to optimize. We've had the weight, the straps that measure amplitude and force output on the ends of the bars that they used. For me, I feel like I'm long enough in my career where I go, okay, I know how I feel today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also crazy enough to push past how I'm feeling and just continue to train hard regardless of how that is, because those are those are the days that make or break a Olympic cycle, right? I mean, if you just look at those numbers, right, and you look at force output and you go, oh man, I'm sluggish today. My nervous system's down. I'm not able to create the same amplitude or forces in what I'm doing. I should just take it easy today. No, I think I would argue that those are the days that you should probably push harder.
Do you, as far as, so the Olympics, just they're a couple of months behind us now. What is the next? I know there's like this Diamond League thing that's like a full-time job all over Europe, and they get paid decent money for doing it. What do you have on your radar now? If you're like, hey, I want to be in LA in 2028, what do you have to do?
Yeah, so we have the Diamond League circuit is typically the circuit that we'll compete on throughout the year. I actually ran in the Diamond League final September 15th. So Olympics was not the end of the season for all of us that kind of compete in that circuit. There is decent money. It's still definitely underpaid for, I think, what
the work you put in.
Yeah. That was kind of one of the driving forces behind me going back to school anyways, right? It's just, God, dude, I'm not making a dime from this. I need to go to school, and then we're here. And anyways, not to get off topic, but we have world championships in Japan this year. So there's typically the cycle will be an Olympic year, a world championship year. Then there's an off year for no major championship. And then we go back to a world championship year, and then we'll be in 2028 for LA again. But they are starting to introduce championship on that off year that's based on world ranking. So instead of us going through the trial phase, right? Because every single year, if you're a US athlete, you have to have a standard or a time or a mark, right? That qualifies you to go to the championships, and then you have to be top 3. I mean, you could be sick on the day. I mean, I've seen guys that are number 1 in the world clip hurdle 10 and miss making a team. I mean, it's brutal, dude, what we have to go through. I mean, I would say that there's more pressure. I think a lot of athletes would attest to this at our trials than major championships.
Interesting. Yeah. Let me, because I don't know the answer to this. If you knock over a hurdle when you're running, what happens? Is that so? Can you still go, or does that exclude you if a hurdle gets knocked over?
You can get disqualified if the hurdle impedes another athlete.
Okay, but if it knocks over, it's not like a penalty or anything like that. It's just, it is what it is. Okay.
I mean, they look at it as you're in the short hurdle. So the 110 hurdles, data shows that it's actually faster to hit the hurdle. I mean, like some of the faster times are people that have clipped all the hurdles, and we're talking, centimeters. This is what we do, right? So we're running full speed at a barrier. You're not going to be right every single time in space. And
it doesn't benefit you to clear the hurdle by 8 inches. I mean, that would slow you down, correct? Yeah. You just want to barely get over that thing, right?
Yep.
Yeah. That's got to be, I guess it's got to take, because I'll do like little plyometrics over these little 9-inch wickets. And I'm like, shit, I want to make sure. How high are the hurdles? Are they like 28 inches, or what is the height on the hurdle? I can't remember.
So my hurdles are 36, and then the 110 runs 42.
Holy cow. That's a big hurdle. I didn't realize that's really high. Yeah. So anyway, so you got to have pretty decent flexibility for that as well. How has, obviously some workouts are going to be harder than others. Some days are going to be more of a kind of a recovery, just skill day. Other days are going to be balls to the wall type stuff. How does your diet impact those days? Do you feel differently for different workouts, or how does that go?
Yeah, so what I've kind of adopted, and I would say I'm very carnivore based. I'd say 85-90% of my diet comes from meat. Mm-hmm. I would say the other 10%, I try to just do the roots and tubers of fermented foods and kind of stay in the non-toxic foods. In school, I haven't drank coffee, I hadn't done anything. And by the time I was in school and as I was experimenting, I'm still experimenting. I'm going to try the full carnivore. I actually just ordered half a cow that's going to come, and I'm going to do a training cycle on it and just see what a full, without anything else looks like. And I just like to experiment with things, and I have very specific metrics that allow me to go, look, this is optimizing performance or it's not, which I think is great because, like rowing, right? It's individualistic, where you have a very metric based outcome. So I'll typically do like a bulletproof coffee where I'm blending butter in with the coffee, and I will train off of that. After that, I will do some sort of steak or chicken or meat as recovery after the fact. I don't do super well eating before training just because it is such a demand on the body. And I mean, when you're in that position where metabolic acidosis is at a high, I mean, you can't walk, right? Your legs are on fire, your ass is on fire. The last thing you want to do is be within 3 hours of eating anything or even thinking about food, or else it's coming up. And so, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you train at that high level, it's interesting because you don't typically want to eat right after it, particularly if you've pushed yourself. It's just like the last thing you want to do is sit down and eat a big meal. You're like, man, I just want to puke sometimes. I don't know if you push yourself to that level, but I mean, it's certainly.
I've puked many times.
I had it was kind of funny when I was in the Air Force, we had our officer training stuff and we would do all this physical fitness stuff. And I would just go all out. I mean, I would just run it, and sometimes I'd puke afterwards. And they got me a shirt that says, "You're not trying if you don't puke," or something like that. It was just like a goofy gift they gave me because I was the guy that would do that stuff. And I know there's people say, "Oh, that's stupid. You don't need to do that." But I mean, you do have to push yourself pretty hard, particularly when you're competing. That's what you're doing. I mean, these guys are running until they die, basically, or as close to it as possible. I mean, they're trying to get every last ounce of energy out of their bodies. You're going hard. Let me ask you, as far as, because a lot of people, when they do a carnivore or near carnivore diet, they'll notice that their recovery seems to be better. And I don't know if you can speak to what you were when you were running your 49s versus now your 47s. How do you feel like recovering from day to day goes? Is it now improved for you think?
I mean, I can unequivocally say yes. I mean, as I kind of alluded to earlier, it's like I have very specific markers that tell me where my inflammation levels are. Unfortunately, I broke my ankle in 2015. Fortunately, it's the first thing that's going to flare up on me if my inflammation's too high or my recovery's too low. And I mean, it sucks, dude. I wake up like I'm 70 years old and I limp around and I'm dragging that leg behind me until it kind of warms up, because I mean, if I have too much inflammation or there are any sort of excess carbohydrates in my diet, I mean, absolutely. I mean, my joints feel better. I mean, even just neural inflammation about the mind, because I think that's something that's really, important and not looked or talked about in performance as well. It's just, I mean, dude, I can shut everything off and go out and just sprint my ass off and die out there. I can do that. I've done that for years and years. When pressure comes up and everything is there, it's a very mental sport. It's like in those moments, it's 90% mental, where you have to be able to think and process, or the opposite, just turn your brain off and not overthink. And so I think even something like neural inflammation and being able to intake, and this was actually something that I have played around with, I think is really interesting, because I think it's something that's avoided often, is even like cholesterol, right? I know that this was something that I had commented on one of your posts, because you were like, all your metrics look great, right? Your differential looked great, but you had high non-HDL cholesterol. And for somebody that's fit, right, it's like all of our neurons, our membranes, all of our myelin sheath, all of the cells in our bodies, they contain cholesterol. So for me, right, it's if all my performance is off of my body's ability to fire the nervous system,
Yeah.
why would you not fuel it with things that are able to increase that transmission?
That's something I talked about I haven't talked about this in many years, but I was thinking about, why is performance better? And we could measure. You could probably do nerve conduction velocity studies and say, how quick does it take a neural impulse to get from point A to point B, from the spinal cord to the toe, running down the sciatic nerve? And you would say it's going to take you, 3.4 milliseconds or something like that. And maybe it's 5% faster now because your neurons are better myelinated and you have that little bit more neural drive. That could be. I mean, it could be. I don't know. I mean, it'd be something to assess based on what you're consuming. And but yeah, you're right. I mean, there's all these just power factors. If all we just assess is how fast you can get on a cycle ergometer and just power output based on carbs, and there's so many more things that go into athletic performance, as you mentioned, the mental, the motivation, the nervous system, the recovery ability, the gut. How's the gut feeling? Because I mean, there's people out there, their guts are all jacked up and they're out there trying to perform at high levels.
I mean, that's, as too, it's obviously the numbers up for debate. I've heard 70% of your immune system's in your gut, but I mean, all of your performance and recovery, in my opinion, is coming from factors like your gut, right? It's if you're inflamed and you're chronically inflamed and everything's breaking down and you have food going into your bloodstream and all these toxic chemicals and everything, it's of course your body's going to be inflamed. It's constantly trying to fight those things off and allow you to recover. I mean, dude, since I've intaked meat, butter, I mean, mostly dairy, right? Like mostly cow products. I mean, I do colostrum as well in the morning. I blend it in the coffee. I'm sure there's somebody in the comments that's going to be saying, oh, hot liquids denature the colostrum. It works. I don't care what that says. I don't even care if it's an N of 1. I mean, I've tried it. I've tested it. My performance should be a measure of that, right? I mean, my performance should be a metric of going, hey, we can see this in action. We can see that it's working.
Yeah, that's a nice thing about being a high-level athlete is you have such an objective measure of what's working for it because the stopwatch doesn't lie, right? I mean, or you're like, well, I'm on a rowing machine. I know. It's like that number does not change unless I get better. And so it's kind of nice to have that obvious feedback. I don't know how vocal you've been about your dietary sort of regimen while doing this. Are there other athletes that have kind of said, hey, dude, what's going on here? I mean, I know some people get that, or what's been your experience?
I'm sure they hate me, but I hammer the people that I can tell are interested in it. I mean, I even remember sitting in class because it's even my peers and these are going to be my peers and colleagues, right? We're sitting in class. And I remember one of my nutrition classes and it had been mentioned up front that seed oils, omega-6s, whatever, heart health, whatever it was, right? And I mean, the entire class turns around and looks at me. And I'm like, maybe I've been a little too vocal on this, right? But I'm like, they're like, you kind of said this. Why? So I approach her just like, hey, with all respect, right? It's just, I've come to know that all this stuff is not healthy, right? It's not good for you to be consuming rancid fats. And she's, yeah, that's a great point. They need to be cold pressed, this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, I'm just thinking, dude, you can't teach a class of people, right? You have to be so specific with those things because I'm nuts about this stuff. And some of my close friends on the circuit and all my athletes as well is like, I feel if they show interest or it's just, hey, we're looking to optimize performance a little bit better. We want to tackle nutrition a little bit more, or whether it's chiropractic care or soft tissue, any of that stuff, right? And it's people know it's if I get on that rant and I get going.
Hopefully you get to the LA Olympics, do well. But I mean, at some point it's going to come to an end. I mean, so you can't be an Olympic 400 meter runner for the rest of your life. And so
for sure.
What are your thoughts on where do you see yourself 10, 15 years down the road? I mean, is it going to, I mean, chiropractic care is, I mean, a lot of people think, well, they just go and crack backs and stuff like that. There's a lot more to it in that. And it's kind of interesting because it's interesting that you're talking about the nutrition you're receiving there. Because as a medical student, that really wasn't an emphasis. But I've noticed that more chiropractors tend to be more nutrition focused than we tend to be in allopathic medicine. So where do you see your practice going or your life going post-competitive athletics?
Yeah, so I have a business partner from school, great guy. I mean, he's a stud. He ran track in college as well. He does professional bodybuilding, all natural now. And he's a big proponent for clean eating and carnivore as well. I mean, we talk about your work and in the carnivore community all the time. So we founded and are opening up private practice, DFA, Chiropractic and Sport Performance Institute.
This is
in Atlanta. Yep, in Atlanta. And I mean, for us, the foundation is obviously chiropractic care, right? I mean, I became injury-free in track and field because of an amazing chiropractor. And for me, it's I wanted to be in a doctorate position to help people and be able to provide care. And I wanted to be a primary healthcare provider. And so it was go to medical school or go become a DC and take that more, from my standpoint, a holistic approach, right? It's like we're not just focused on providing a Band-Aid solution real quick. I want to get to the root causes of these things. I want to be able to work with the people I want to work with. At the end of the day, I want to be able to work with athletes. I want to be able to provide care and share my experiences, right? Because there's not many people who are in my position. I mean, that's just a fact, right? And so it's for me, I would love, and I love being in that position. And for us, we want to be able to provide that chiropractic care. We want to be able to provide information necessary for performance. We want to be able to provide supplementation and diet changes and lifestyle changes because, I mean, ultimately, whether you're an athlete or not, or just somebody that wants to become more active, you're our person, right? And so there's so many other factors that play into this besides just, well, go out and run. Right. Or go do some intervals. And it sounds crazy, but people will think that, right? It's just, oh, you're just a track guy or you're just a chiropractor. You either crack backs or you know how to sprint. There are so many other things that factor into health and optimization. And we want to be on the forefront of that because I think because of the unique nature of who we are and what we can offer is this, I would love to have that in our practice as well and be able to point people in that direction because I think that change is going to start. I mean, it starts with us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the overlap between performance as an athlete and health and I'll dare say longevity, there's a lot of overlap there. And I think it's not being a world-class athlete means you're going to live forever, but I mean, there the things that you have to do to get to that level in many ways, the good things you do. I'm not talking about people that are taking drugs and all the other crap that sometimes goes into that. But the general things, the sleep, the recovery, the exercise, the nutrition, those things have carryover to the general population for sure. So you're in a good place to be, and you'll have some insight that, obviously the vast majority of people don't, even as to chiropractors. And like you said, you're a good, it reminds me of a guy named Eric Heiden, who was an Olympic speed skater, went and became an orthopedic surgeon. So they've got some insight that a lot of people don't have. CJ, I got to run, unfortunately, man. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I don't want to be out. I'll be out in your neck of the woods in December over the holidays. I don't know if you're around. Anyway, I'm going to Alpharetta. I got a sister-in-law there. I don't know
dude, I'm right down the road. You want to get a training session in?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it, man. Okay. I'll reach out to you later. All right. I got to go. Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
All right. Take care, CJ.